30 years or something like
Really?
that. He really has fun with it.
Nice.
And
You could also moonlight as a reborn Dusty Hill. And that was just a year ago.
Yeah.
Mourning the
Yeah,
called a yard site of the death of Dusty Hill. Skip, do you know who we're talking about?
I don't.
It's sort of a Texas thing and sort of if I can call myself youth thing. He was one of the members of ZZ Top.
Yeah. Kind of the modern Woody Guthrie.
They are folk. Actually, the guy who took over for him, I think, is still folk.
Yeah.
Great people.
I could do
not all politically correct though.
Oh, which that means I like it more, you know.
Thank heavens for that.
Yeah, exactly. all that nice with no kindness whatsoever.
I'm wearing my purple today.
Nice.
Well, you know what's interesting? That purple, and I might have said something when I first spotted it. The last dream that I remembered really extensively was 2 nights ago, and a good friend of mine was wearing exactly that purple. And when he walked into this kind of church, this church in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, I know what church he was walking into, and I was in there already, and he sat on an empty seat next to me, and I put my head on his shoulder, and I just started weeping. And it was such a wonderful thing to do in the dream, but it was very much about the color.
Yeah.
It's a regal.
I called it a jewel tone when I read the dream.
That's interesting.
It's so regal, you know, emperor, empress kind of purple. It's
yeah.
Of course, I'm doing it because it represents the conjunctio of red and blue.
Close to that one.
Yes, very close to that color.
One of my chapters, do we call them? This is my platinum jubilee. I shouldn't be revealing so much, but
it's funny because I wore my purple Guatemalan shirt out to the plaza yesterday, and it's almost that same. It was a little bit grayer, but it's almost the same color. It's funny.
I remember you in that color, Jordan. I think we've talked about that color in relation to your clothing.
Yeah, and it's funny because everyone now comes up, where do you get your shirts? You wear the same shirt every day, but it's a different color. And I said, well, I have 5 of them. There's a red one, a light cinnabar, there's a cobalt blue, there's a purple, and then there's a black. And I said, yeah, but you're out here. It's 28 degrees in the winter. I saw you with no coat in one of these. It's 92 today, and you're still all smiles. And like, they breathe. So they keep my body heat, or they let my body heat out, you know. And so it's funny though, you brought the platinum jubilee piece up, because I heard a joke yesterday. God and Jesus are having a conversation, and Jesus is asking about the creation. He said, you know, I need to kind of brush up my history and find out where everything comes from. Someone said ontology the other day, and I didn't know what they were talking about. And so, Dad, help me out. And so God says, well, and he goes all the way through it. And then he looks over, and Queen Elizabeth is sitting on a bench. He goes, Dad, who's that? And God goes, I have no idea. She was here when I started.
Yes.
Yeah. Yuri, I'm pleased to know that you watched the movie. That's very true. I think most people don't know that Stalin starved to death about 10 million Ukrainians, and dead people don't tell tales. So I'm sure a lot of modern Ukrainians don't even know this story. He had the Ukrainians reduced to cannibalism, and that's what's depicted in the Mr. Jones movie at one point. It's done very in a sublimated sort of way, but you definitely get the message. And
Well, and the irony is he ended up killing all the doctors. And so when he had a heart attack or however, no one was there to help him.
Right.
It's like,
yeah, well, that's the way it goes, when you do that.
paranoia will destroy you. It's not just a song,
but
true.
But Mr. Jones, so as you know, Annabelle, is a 2019 movie that depicts a young journalist who is sitting in Britain, and he puts numbers together in terms of what's happening in Russia. This is happening in 1933.
Uh-huh.
And he realizes that the numbers that the Soviet Union is putting out are false. And so he wants to go to Russia and figure out what the truth is. So he goes to Russia, and he manages to get himself into Ukraine. And what he finds out is that Stalin's goal is wheat that Stalin is stealing from Ukraine, and to such a large extent that he's starving the people who are farming the wheat, namely the Ukrainians.
Okay.
And he actually starved about 10 million of them to death,
Mhm.
maybe more. And so that movie called Mr. Jones it really tells me why the Ukrainians will never give up in the current war.
Oh.
And and the movie has a theme flowing through it, where George Orwell is in the process of reading Animal Farm, or writing Animal Farm, and the movie and the book end in the same way. And so I decided to activate my banned book project, and I read Animal Farm over the last 2 weeks. It's now
great.
complete, and it's quite a story.
Yeah.
And Yuri says, I heard the stories, and we learned about Holodomor in schools and from my grandma, who was there and ate the grass to survive, but I missed the movie. Okay, well, so, but Yuri, you did see the movie, I gather from what you said in your first response. Okay. But that's why I read Animal Farm, and it's quite a romp. It's one of the banned books. But anyway, we don't have to talk about that tonight. We have lots more to do. So
just looking into the book also, we probably should start on paragraph 361 instead of 362, because paragraph 362 discusses the potentially dubious supposition put forth in 361. And
okay, so I will read 361 as a homage to last week, and then Jordan, you'll read 362. But just at the beginning of scientific chemistry, we're hopelessly distorted and confused by fantastic conceits and whimsicalities. So alchemical philosophy, hampered by the inevitable concretization of the still crude and undifferentiated intellect, never advanced to any clear psychological formulation, despite the fact that the liveliest intuition of profound truths kept the medieval thinker passionately attached to the problems of alchemy. No one who has undergone the process of assimilating the unconscious will deny that it gripped his very vitals and changed him. Certainly, I would not deny that. So go for it, Jordan.
Paragraph 362. I would not blame my reader at all if he shakes his head dubiously at this point, being quite unable to imagine how such a quantité négligeable negligible quantity, as the footling fantasy given above could ever have the slightest influence on anybody. I admit at once that in considering the transcendent function and the extraordinary influence attributed to it, the fragment we have quoted is anything but illuminating. But it is, and here I must appeal to the benevolent understanding of my reader, exceedingly difficult to give any examples, because every example has the unfortunate characteristic of being impressive and significant only to the individual concerned. Therefore, I always advise my patients not to cherish the naive belief that what is of the greatest significance to them personally also has an objective significance.
Okay. Annabelle, you want to comment on that?
Oh, you're muted, Annabelle.
Oh, thanks. I was drawn by the fact that in that previous paragraph, which I'm glad we read, it was framing this as a comparison with medieval society compared to, I would assume, paragraph 362 is contemporary society. And that notion of how the mind worked, or how a person perceived different levels of reality, whether it was, as we were talking about just now, a dream reality, or fantastic conceits, or whimsicalities, and then alchemy. I just think it's really fascinating to balance those. And then, of course, at the end of paragraph 362, he's saying the individual's sense of what matters, if I can simplify it that way, is de rigueur not going to be the same as what matters in that bigger kind of global sense, or not even global, maybe in the most simplest distilling down sense of what really has significance. And one reason that I was so drawn to that medieval concept is because I've been thinking about that a lot, because I've been studying Scottish history.
Ooh.
And that is a history that is so kind of convoluted and embodies the cultures and civilizations of so many different kinds of people. And it goes so far back into Neolithic time. And the way I'm studying it is in that sense, you know, the Picts and their Neolithic drawings, and what did they mean? And then coming right up to October 2023, there's going to be another referendum, you know, just this whole arc of it. Much of it we can't understand. We can't understand what somebody out on a battlefield with Robert the Bruce, or, you know, any of these characters, we can't really understand what they were thinking out there. But when we think about them with their weaponry, and we look at what's going on in the Ukraine, for example, a battle for sovereignty, for notions of freedom, then we can think that we begin to understand what it was that would get a guy to just pick up one of those matlocks or whatever they called them and just chop a guy to bits, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking. So that's my commentary on this, is what can we know about the past and medieval thinking and operationality, and then how true it is what he's ultimately saying here, that the only real truth is this sort of universal, which is what he's trying to teach us.
Yeah, he's trying to get
Yeah.
to the collective unconscious.
Yes.
I think it's important to talk about the transcendent function here for a moment, since it was mentioned here. And that is the function that causes us to skip over the fence between consciousness and the unconscious. And what he's saying here is that if something pops out of your unconscious that's numinous to you, it doesn't mean that it's going to be numinous to everyone. Okay. It doesn't mean that it's that significant. And this building that's sitting behind me in this image right there, which is called Bollingen, was a building that Dr. Jung built with his bare hands because he wanted to get back to the way people would have been in the 16th or 17th century. And so that building was never plumbed. It never had any plumbing, and it never had any electricity. But he used to go out there and spend weeks at a time to see how his unconscious, how his psyche was related to the medieval times. And so he said that when he was out there, the only thing that a person of the 16th century would see that was out of place would be the matches. Other than that, he built it as much as he could as the way a 16th century or 17th century builder would do.
And I think those are both great examples. The house of the Bollingen, and then Annabelle bringing up the universality of that. Basically, the archetypal is the objective piece rather than your personal experience. And in a sense, the personal experience is the apple that you take from the tree, but it's not the tree. And so I think what's interesting too is, the beliefs of what is of greatest significance to them personally also has objective significance, is him also getting his patients to inspect their expectations, because he's getting them out of what they're accustomed to get them into empathy of the whole. And I think that's really important, because there's, the old joke of, don't believe everything that you think, and it's that kind of where your thinking is typically tailored by your previous environmental conditions,
Right.
by your life.
And people have to be shaken out of their solipsistic megalomania, which is, a psychiatry term which Dr. Edinger talked about quite a lot. And that, the most, there are two solipsistic megalomaniacs in current affairs. I won't identify them because they're quite obvious. And so the question is, how do you take somebody like that who thinks it's all about me and point out to them that no, it's not all about you? And, if they go to jail for 10 years, will they realize it? I don't know. I'm doubtful.
That might entrench them further with the martyrdom support they'll get. It's interesting with the solipsism piece. For people who don't know, it's basically the philosophy that only the self exists and nothing else. And so it leads into a lot of the philosophers who, played the "is life just a dream" game. And I remember in philosophy in college going, well, if we just simply make it solipsistic transcendentalism, it's not so bad. But if you just stick in and basically live and rot and expire only in yourself, besides being the most boring human being on the planet, you're probably also going to be the most miserable one also, because you don't have any connections. And even your self connections within, I think, start to wither and desiccate if you're only alone. I mean, not everyone can take the cave for more than 6 years. I mean, it's a process, like Plato's cave. So that solipsistic piece, I think, is very important. With Mr. Orange Hair and Mr. No Hair.
Yeah. So Annabelle, you want to read paragraph 363?
Sure. And also, just an aside, I will be turning off my camera every now and then. I am eating a little bit of food over here on the side.
Okay, yes, enjoy.
Right. Okay. The vast majority of people are quite incapable of putting themselves individually into the mind of another. This is indeed a singularly rare art, and truth to tell, it does not take us very far. Even the man whom we think we know best and who assures us himself that we understand him through and through is at bottom a stranger to us. He is different. The most we can do, and the best, is to have at least some inkling of his otherness, to respect it and to guard against the outrageous stupidity of wishing to interpret it.
Mm-hmm. I like how that really dials into the importance of dignity and difference, where it's about let them express, but you don't need to have them explain it. So you need to experience it and respect it rather than trying always to average it out or explain it away. In a bigger sense, it's like the melting pot of cultures is actually a cultural murder. It would just make an average of a certain color of tan across the board. And that's boring. I mean, it's just, okay, there's only chocolate ice cream, then not everyone's going to run for ice cream anymore because it's not special. They're not all these fancy, gelato and everything else. And so I think the dignity and difference there with the guard against the outrageous stupidity of wishing to interpret it is important, where someone is as they are. And it's more important, I think, to hear for that identity rather than to just listen to what you expect it is.
I like the fact that he uses stupidity in a place where he could use the word arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is
a
parallel between arrogance and stupidity. And maybe we would be wise to think of the word stupidity when we're encountering arrogance, not just from those current world leaders who are not only arrogant, but also very simply stupid.
Yeah.
Well, that's really I think that's a really important distinction you brought out there with arrogance, because arrogance usually comes from someone sitting too much on only one piece of their laurels, not even on all of them. And they get so single-minded that, yes, they're quicker, but the problem is in ideas and imaginal realms, quicker, you're not 100-yard dash. You're not running for time. You're running for value.
Right.
And it's your arrogance is right. I would say arrogance is the educated stupidity. It's like,
yeah. Okay. I can therefore produce nothing convincing, nothing that would convince the reader as it convinces the man whose deepest experience it is. We must simply believe it by reason of its analogy with our own experience. Ultimately, when all else fails, the end result is plain beyond a doubt: the perceptible change of personality. With these reservations in mind, I would like to present the reader with another fantasy fragment, this time from a woman. The difference from the previous example leaps to the eye. Here, the experience is total. The observer takes an active part and thus makes the process her own. The material in this case is very extensive, culminating in a profound transformation of personality. The fragment comes from a late phase of personal development and is an organic part of a long and continuous series of transformations, which have as their goal the attainment of the midpoint of the personality. Okay, why don't you go ahead, Jordan, because that paragraph.
Yeah, we need to get to that.
Yeah.
Yep. It may not be immediately apparent what is meant by a midpoint of the personality. I will therefore try to outline this problem in a few words. If we picture the conscious mind with the ego as its center, as being opposed to the unconscious, and if we now add to our mental picture the process of assimilating the unconscious, we can think of this assimilation as a kind of approximation of conscious and unconscious, where the center of the total personality no longer coincides with the ego, but with a point midway between the conscious and the unconscious. This would be the point of new equilibrium, a new centering of the total personality, a virtual center which, on account of its focal position between conscious and unconscious, ensures for the personality a new and more solid foundation. I freely admit that visualizations of this kind are no more than the clumsy attempts of the unskilled mind to give expression to inexpressible and well-nigh indescribable psychological facts. I could say the same thing in the words of St. Paul, in quotes, yet not I live, but Christ liveth in me, end quote. Or I might invoke Lao Tzu and appropriate his concept of Tao, the middle way and creative center of all things. In all these, the same thing is meant. Speaking as a psychologist with a scientific conscience, I must say at once that these things are psychic factors of undeniable power. They are not the inventions of an idle mind, but definite psychic events obeying definite laws and having their legitimate causes and effects, which can be found among most widely differing peoples and races today as thousands of years ago. I have no theory as to what constitutes the nature of these processes. One would first have to know what constitutes the nature of the psyche. I am content simply to state the facts. And so I love that he beheads ontology right there. No one's going to start going, well, how do you it's like, no, stay with the truth, stay with the facts, stay with the facts. I mean, I think that was a very savvy way to end that paragraph.
Okay, so Annabelle, let's go ahead and read the whatever it is.
Sure.
Dream.
Coming now to our example, it concerns a fantasy of intensely visual character, something which in the language of the ancients would be called a vision. Not a vision seen in a dream, but a vision perceived by intense concentration on the background of consciousness, a technique that is perfected only after long practice. And in the footnote, this technique is elsewhere called active imagination. From the
transcendent
function, right? And Mysterian Cosmonaut. Okay. Okay. Told in her own words, this is what the patient saw. Shall I continue?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. I climbed the mountain and came to a place where I saw 7 red stones in front of me, 7 on either side, and 7 behind me. I stood in the middle of this quadrangle. The stones were flat like steps. I tried to lift the 4 stones nearest me. In doing so, I discovered that these stones were the pedestals of 4 statues of gods buried upside down in the earth. I dug them up and arranged them about me so that I was standing in the middle of them. Suddenly, They leaned toward one another until their heads touched, forming something like a tent over me. I myself fell to the ground and said, fall upon me if you must. I am tired. Then I saw that beyond, encircling the four gods, a ring of flame had formed. After a time, I got up from the ground and overthrew the statues of the gods. Where they fell, 4 trees shut up. At that, blue flames leapt up from the ring of fire and began to burn the foliage of the trees. Seeing this, I said, this must stop. I must go into the fire myself so that the leaves shall not be burned. Then I stepped into the fire. The trees vanished and the fiery ring drew together to one immense blue flame that carried me up from the earth.
Okay. What comes to your mind, Jordan?
Well, it's interesting to me, architecturally, the way that those kind of big structures are put together comes to mind, because when you start to, towards the end, realize the 7 stones are part of the same one pedestal, each of 4, that those are the tenons that would insert into the mortise of the pedestal. And then she's basically the pedestal. And so it's interesting because that tenon, seeing the understructure, the space between rocks that is unseen. I mean, we put 2 huge megalithic rocks together. Inside, there's usually a divot called a mortise, and then a tenon on the other stone that sits in, so they lock together. They're not just, slippy, slidey balance. And so that she saw the tenons, those things that connect in stone, connect in nature and earth, really struck me. That then she flipped them over, and when she sat them down, they leaned to her. So she became their pedestal. She became their support. And I thought that was, to me, image just popped out. Oh, look at the tenons. And, oh, wow, what a dream. Her seeing the unseen in structure.
Right.
As one,
well,
I don't want to
to
stupidity of, let's don't just use my example. What do you guys think too? Because I don't want to act like mine is the only one.
Annabelle, do you want to comment?
Well, the couple of things about it. One is that I also, and maybe it's because I'm a child of 2 architects, thought of the Neolithic stones. So I thought of very ancient structure as I heard this description as I was reading it. So that it was the stones in a way that took precedence for me over the idea of statues of gods. Statues of gods just immediately makes me think about what they're doing at the Metropolitan Museum, which is that they're painting these statues of various gods and humans and, people from ancient times, because there's been this scholarship that says, well, this is supposed to be this very bright red and this is supposed to be this very bright green. And there's a lot of debate about it. So here in this dream, it's her reality. There's nothing debatable here. And the connection between gods and trees is very elemental and believable to me in terms of just daily reality. But the most important part of this description to me that I related to personally is the way that the blue flames became a column of blue light. Being a person who meditates and who has spent time with a lot of other people who meditate, whether they were Buddhist or they weren't Buddhist, this notion of being in a meditation and then realizing that you're within a column of light is something very familiar to me. Mm-hmm. And the way it was always described to me, who is not someone who knows anything about chakras, same way that I knew nothing about tarot before the beginning of what we did. But it's a familiar vocabulary to me, right? In a similar way.
Yeah.
So this chakra notion is something I have no idea which part of the, that chakra column the blue comes from. But I do remember being within personally a violet, and now we're not in the same purple that you're wearing tonight, Skip, that we've been discussing, but a very kind of pale, almost periwinkle violet column of light. And also I remember being within a very golden yellow, like it was the rays of the sun, column of light. But I do mean a column, and it was around me. It was not pervasive in the room as I was in the meditation. And these were both experiences I had in group meditation circumstances. I knew that not everybody was in the same column of light that I was in. So that's what I want to say about that. And the idea of that column of light carrying her up makes perfect sense to me. That's an experiential memory, experience that I remember that. So,
Well, what I
just up. Go ahead.
What I just take note of is the use of the number 7 here, which this morning I happened to have been reading the last few chapters of Revelation. And of course, in those few chapters, you have God opening the 7 seals, among other things. And the 7 horses and all that stuff. And so I'm just commenting on that it's quite archetypal what she said here. But
well, and that's a good point with the numbers, because 7 is that, and then 7 times 4 is 28, and 2 and 8 is 10, and 1 and 0 is 1. So she's playing the 7s and the quaternity and the unity of the quaternity all together. And when you brought up the chakras, Annabelle, that's interesting, because the blue chakra is the throat chakra. And then, so it would be the power of her voice. So in a sense, she's respecting herself as her own ancestor. And in that sense, and then the purple or the violet chakra is the crown chakra. Yes. And so it's interesting to me that then that's basically octavizing or elevating her to a transcendent place, which he's talking about this new center, the center that's not in the middle, the center that's between. So it's interesting where the connection of, there's an idea there, I think, of synapse or interstice and space between. And I think that's why even in architecture, space is so important, because the forms have ossified. You create the skeleton that defines borders and identifies the space. But the space itself is the heart of the matter of the identity. But there's a harmonic that's created by what's around a space that tenors the space, literally. So I think when you bring in all that up with the blue and then the light, and it's interesting too, when she pushes them off, the snake, its skin shedded, the snake, its skin not missed, she's molding, except that's when the trees come up. So her natural transformation makes nature. She herself seeds the earth, as it were.
Yeah. Okay, so let's keep moving. We have 3 or so pages to go before the end of this chapter, and I sort of want to complete that tonight, because next week I want to talk about the mana personality, which is the next section of this book, and that's quite significant for a variety of reasons. But so here, let's sort of limit. Let's limit this, and I'll read 367, and then we'll take a page at a time, I guess, and see if we can do the comments. Maybe there's there's two paragraphs we have to read, and then the next one's a long paragraph. So anyway, here the vision ended. Unfortunately, I cannot see how I can make conclusively clear to the reader the extraordinarily interesting meaning of this vision. The fragment is an excerpt from a long sequence, and one would have to explain everything that happened before and afterward in order to grasp the significance of the picture. At all events, the unprejudiced reader will recognize at once the idea of a midpoint that is reached by a kind of climb, mountaineering effort, struggle. He will also recognize without difficulty the famous medieval conundrum of the squaring of the circle, which belongs to the field of alchemy. Here it takes its rightful place as a symbol of individuation. The total personality is indicated by the four cardinal points of the four gods, i.e., the four functions, which give bearings in psychic space, and also by the circle enclosing the whole. Overcoming the four gods who threaten to smother the individual signifies liberation from identification with the four functions. A fourfold nirvana, I guess, free from opposites.
Nirvana.
Yeah, nirvana, but that's nirvana. I think it's just mispronounced and misspelled here.
I think he may be nirvana. He may be trying. That's true. He might have actually slipped up in Greek and just misspelled nirvana.
Yeah. Following by an approximation to the circle and undivided wholeness. This in turn leads to further exaltation. Okay, Jordan, 368.
I must content myself with these hints. Anyone who takes the trouble to reflect upon the matter will be able to form a rough idea of how the transformation of personality proceeds. Through her active participation, the patient merges herself in the unconscious processes, and she gains possession of them by allowing them to possess her. In this way, she joins the conscious to the unconscious. The result is ascension in the flame, transmutation in the alchemical heat, the genesis of the subtle spirit. That is the transcendent function born of the union of opposites.
Okay. All right, this is pretty straightforward conjunctio.
Yeah.
Annabelle, do you want to continue with 369?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Camera back. I must recall at this point a serious misunderstanding to which my readers often succumb, and doctors most commonly. They invariably assume, for reasons unknown, that I never write about anything except my method of treatment. This is far from being the case. I write about psychology. I must therefore expressly emphasize that my method of treatment does not consist in causing my patients to indulge in strange fantasies for the purpose of changing their personality and other nonsense of that kind. I merely put it on record that there are certain cases where such a development occurs, not because I force anyone to it, but because it springs from inner necessity. For many of my patients, these things are and must remain double Dutch. Indeed, even if it were possible for them to tread this path, it would be disastrously wrong turning, and I would be the first to hold them back. The way of the transcendent function is an individual destiny. But on no account should one imagine that this way is equivalent to the life of a psychic anchorite, to alienation from the world. Quite the contrary, for such a way is possible and profitable only when the specific worldly tasks which these individuals set themselves are carried out in reality. Fantasies are no substitute for living. They are fruits of the spirit which fall to him who pays his tribute to life. The shirker experiences nothing but his own morbid fear, and it yields him no meaning. Nor will this way ever be known to the man who has found his way back to Mother Church. There is no doubt that the mysterium magnum is hidden in her forms, and in these he can live his life sensibly. Finally, the normal man will never be burdened either with this knowledge, for he is everlastingly content with the little that lies within his reach. Wherefore, I entreat my reader to understand that I write about things which actually happen and am not propounding methods of treatment.
Okay, fair enough.
And you were right about the Nirvandva is a
Mhm.
thing in the Sanskrit, except it is straight up conjunctio. It's simply not acknowledging two principles. So it is that conjunctio.
Right.
Mm.
Okay. And here she's read about people that need help, and they come back to Mother Church because Mother Church takes care of you in this. But it's like the football fan addict telling him, well, you'll feel better if you go to another football game. Sure, there are rules to the game, and their boundaries and all those things. But the only people that are having an authentic experience are the guys that are down on the field, including the coaches and so on. But the people that are in the stands are living life vicariously. And so this goes back to the idea that was expressed, I guess, first in the mid-90s of get a life. We have to get a life in real life, not in fantasy, because otherwise we just waste our lives.
Well, and it's a good point about the football or sports like that, because even just in the title from James Hellman's book, A Terrible Love of War, it's that drama, that plays out in the gladiators or on the stage, and the tragedy, always the tragedy. And I laughed that I remember a girlfriend a long time ago's daughter had met my dad and my stepmom, and he mentioned that she asked him what he did, and he's one of the things, I teach Greek tragedy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She goes, oh yeah, Greek tragedy, that's where they do this. Oh, I love you so much. Like stabbing herself. It's like, wait. She goes, it's the shortest tragedy I know. You just say I love you and then you off yourself. And she's like, and he was cackling because she basically nailed the DNA structure of any Greek tragedy in about a sentence or two.
That's funny. Okay. These two examples of fantasy represent the positive activity of anima and animus. To the degree that the patient takes an active part, here's the rub. To the degree that the patient takes an active part, the personified figure of anima or animus will disappear. It becomes the function of relationship between conscious and unconscious. But when the unconscious contents, these same fantasies, are not realized, they give rise to a negative activity and personification, i.e., to the autonomy of animus and anima. Psychic abnormalities then develop, states of possession ranging in degree from ordinary moods and ideas to psychosis. All these states are characterized by one and the same fact that an unknown something has taken possession of a smaller or greater portion of the psyche and asserts its hateful and harmful existence undeterred by all our insight, reason, and energy, thereby proclaiming the power of the unconscious over the conscious mind. The sovereign power of possession. In this state, the possessed part of the psyche generally develops an animus or anima psychology. The woman's incubus consists of a host of masculine demons. The man's succubus is a vampire. Comments?
That really is interesting. The man's succubus is a vampire. I had a collection of poetry back in 2002 that I called Prescient Remembrance, Dialogue of a Vampire. And what it really was a love story of, him trying to find her. And really her was his soul and the creative drive. So in a sense, it was a preamble to leaving the nest, so to speak, as it were, the 34-page poetic attempt at wing flapping, as it were, just because he's searching, he's directed, he's not wandering kind of thing. But it's interesting, that vampire piece, I hadn't thought about Prescient Remembrance, Dialogue of a Vampire, being kind of an ode to my creative drive, the anima, as it were. And that's kind of interesting. I mean, Annabelle, from your perspective, the host of masculine demons, does that resonate at all, or?
Yes, but it's so complicated, I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yeah.
There's and I'm in this first year, and even though I don't know how to count time in terms of these things, but the first year after my father's death in November, my lover of 22 years, his death in May, and one of my closest friends, another man who died instantly on June 11th. So there was November 22nd and May 23rd, but it actually was the night of the 22nd, and then June 11th. And each one, I am processing these male, I was going to say absences, that doesn't work. Disappearances, that doesn't work, because actually it's the changed presence. That's really what it is. My father, of course, I knew my entire life. The person in May, I knew since 1979. I know exactly the day. And the friend who did the cover of a book of mine. And I was immediately invited to speak on a panel about him. I said, I'm not an art history person. They said, but you understand the depths of his work. And I'm the only female speaking on a panel of men. There are just so many complicated things about it that that's what your question brings up, a processing that, right. And him I knew since 1973. So I just wanted to frame, that these are very long developed female male relationships, each one very, very different.
Right. I've always been put off by horror films, and especially vampire films.
Yes.
And I was going through some of this material with Gene Raffa about 20 years ago. And finally I said, Gene, do I really have to go and read all these Anne Rice vampire books and go watch the movies and so on? And she said, no, you don't. You don't have to take that into your head. And so I chose not to. But there are plenty of things in society that will suck the life out of us if we don't look out. And those are vampirish. We have to pay attention to what is sucking our life substance that we don't really want to have sucked, right?
Well, and I hadn't thought about it in that in that just that way before, because I will, if a horror movie even sniffs, not even smells, if it's anywhere near me, it's off. And part of it is I don't have a photographic memory, but I have a really, really good memory. And it's like I'm asking for a really negative earworm of a song stuck in my head. And the thing also is, in my whole line of work, there's a point of making besties with beasties. Well, those are real beasties inside. They're powerful. And horror movies to me are superficial, avoidant beasties. So I'm going to sit there and be scared and terrified while I'm also laughing, going, not to go around the corner. Don't you hear the dangerous violin music? It's like if you hear the cello on the beach, don't go in the water. So so then my musical, I can pick the instrument out piece, starts to make fun of the horror movie. But then I'm remembering even more, because I'm giving myself this musical peg system of the cadence of the music, which just submerges me in this superficial mess instead of dealing with the self-regulation within. It feels to me it's like taking a dose of chaos just to make sure you can have anxiety and stress yourself out when you didn't have any in the first place. And I think my life, maybe it's exciting enough, or at least enjoyable, that I don't need someone else to stick me with a cattle prod, Yeah.
And someone said, well, taking a girl to a horror flick is a way of getting her to sit closer to you and or welcome your arm around her, and
wimpy man's way to connect, right?
Right.
I can't do it.
Poor man's seduction, I'm sure. And and you come outside and you say, "Oh, thank God, that's not in my real world." But it is in your real world, and it's psychic, it's imaginary, but it's a part of our lives, and we have to be aware of it. So we're getting close to driving this stake in this particular chapter.
Well, we are. I would like to specifically say, though, to Annabelle, I didn't mean to minimize, because the host of masculine demons, you're dealing with life and grief and big. And that's not demons.
They are not demons. No.
Right.
However, your question had to bring up that as an answer. You say,
well, and what's resonating to me is it reminds me of Jamie Anderson's quote of grief is simply love with no place to go. And there was before we moved on, there was a power in what you were saying, responding with your third option, the reality, rather than the yes or no of, is Jung correct here? So I appreciate
that's where the church and the collective helps us, because actually it's with somewhat place to go. If you go to the collective, it'll help you pass these hard points of life, which are pretty massive, of course. So I'm going to split this up and suggest that Jordan read the next two paragraphs, and then I'll let Annabelle take it home with the last long paragraph.
You'll make the grand
stop.
Yep. So Jordan.
Okay.
371.
Paragraph 371. This particular concept of a soul, which according to the conscious attitude either exists by itself or disappears in a function, has, as anyone can see, not the remotest connection with the Christian concept of the soul. The second fantasy is a typical example of the kind of content produced by the collective unconscious. Although the form is entirely subjective and individual, the substance is nonetheless collective, being composed of universal images and ideas common to the generality of men, components, therefore, by which the individual is assimilated to the rest of humankind. If these contents remain unconscious, The individual is in them unconsciously commingled with other individuals. In other words, one is not differentiated, not individuated.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. So it's good to be conscious of them. This is why I'm wearing the purple short shirt, because I know that I'm commingled with the red and the blue, and I'm very conscious of it, and I want to make more people conscious of it. That's why I've been using it as a fashion statement for several years. Good evening, Brian. You may have arrived at the end of the evening, but let us see.
Okay.
We're going to do one more paragraph, and Annabelle is going to take it home for us. So
Yeah.
paragraph
Brian,
373.
he jumped into the stands. He knew Annabelle was about to hit a grand slam. So,
Oh.
like,
Right.
I'm for the good part.
Here one may ask, perhaps, why it is so desirable that a man should be individuated. Not only is it desirable, it is absolutely indispensable, because through his contamination with others, he falls into situations and commits actions which bring him into disharmony with himself. From all states of unconscious contamination and non-differentiation, there is begotten a compulsion to be and to act in a way contrary to one's own nature.
Okay, Annabelle, you were not aware, but let us try to read these things without the male pronoun. Okay, in other words,
Oh.
Right. We have been for some months in the advanced reading group trying to change Jung's words and Neumann's words so that they are gender neutral.
Okay.
Right, because they do apply to men and women alike.
Yeah.
And so if you can, in the next sentence where it says accordingly a man,
A person.
say a person. Yeah.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Good. Accordingly, a person can neither be at one with themselves nor accept responsibility for themselves. This person feels themselves to be in a degrading, unfree, unethical condition. But the disharmony with themselves is precisely the neurotic and intolerable condition from which this person seeks to be delivered, and deliverance from this condition will come only when the person can be and act as that person feels is conformable with that person's true self. People have a feeling for these things, dim and uncertain at first, but growing ever stronger and clearer with progressive development. When a person can say of their states and actions, as I am, so I act, this person can be at one with themselves, even though it be difficult, and the person can accept responsibility for themselves, even though the person struggle against it. We must recognize that nothing is more difficult to bear with than oneself. You sought the heaviest burden and found yourself, says Nietzsche. Yet even this most difficult of achievements becomes possible if we can distinguish ourselves from the unconscious contents. The introvert discovers these contents in themselves. The extrovert finds them projected upon human objects. In both cases, the unconscious contents are the cause of blinding illusions which falsify ourselves and our relations to fellow humans, making both unreal. For these reasons, individuation is indispensable for certain people, not only as a therapeutic necessity, but as a high ideal, an idea of the best we can do. Nor should I omit to remark that it is at the same time the primitive Christian ideal of the kingdom of heaven, which is within you. The idea at the bottom of this ideal is that right action comes from right thinking, and that there is no cure and no improving of the world that does not begin with the individual themselves. To put the matter drastically, the person who is pauper or parasite will never solve the social question.
Right. And so in honor of that, I will acknowledge to this company something that is new that has happened to me in the last week, which I have been moved to because my wife is now approaching, well, let's see, she's in her one of the later years that ends with a decade, and she wants to cut back on her work, which means that our family budget ends up a little short. And I'm 75 years old, so it's not like I'm going to go out and get a job at McDonald's or something to make up for that shortfall. So last week I applied for a substitute teaching position. And today I was accepted for that. And I kidded to some of my friends that all they're looking for is someone who can fog a mirror. And sure enough, I was right, because I have not spoken to a single person at the school district, not one. But I completed their application procedure, and today they said, you're in, show up September 1st. So
Congratulations.
Even though, I've got all these advanced degrees and stuff, I have to dumb down my experience. I'm sure I can do anything in a classroom under in the secondary or below level out of my hip pocket, of course. So it might be kind of fun, but you have to face yourself, and you have to say, well, do I want to keep my aura that I'm a lawyer and all this crap. And of course I could have applied for a legal license in the state of Maryland 25 years ago, and I never did it. I am licensed in New York, but not in Maryland. And I'm certified to teach in New York, but not in Maryland. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, it appears that I am going to do some substitute teaching. It doesn't appear that that's going to affect anything on my evening schedule or my Sunday morning schedule. Not clear how it might affect the advanced reading group as yet. That's an open question.
Or your psyche. How it will affect your psyche.
Yeah, well, that's an issue too.
I'm not sure you need to dumb down, though. I did substitute teaching a lot when I was getting my master's in education, and I found it wonderfully enlightening and really inspired. I really inspired some children, and they also inspired me. And I found, after going into teaching, that it was when I was substitute teaching that I didn't have to contend with the craziness of the administrations of the school as much as I was interacting with the children. And that's the real problem with education, is these crazy administrations and curricula and all that. You go in as a substitute teacher, you can actually teach them something.
Right. Yeah, that's a cool thing. I did apply for some full-time teaching also, which was a little bit more complicated. The substitute teaching, I only had to get one transcript in, which was easy. They received the transcript today, and obviously they made the offer today. Fogging the mirror.
Warm bodies.
Right, but the others are full-time teaching, which require, of course, Maryland certification. And I do not know what the process for Maryland certification is. I suppose they would let me teach under some sort of waiver while I went through the.
They sure will.
You have to fog 2 mirrors.
Yeah, but I have no problem with the credentials for teaching.
Right.
And somewhere the state of New York can find my permanent teaching certificate, which was granted in 1975. And
Right.
it turns out it's a little complicated because nobody started keeping things electronically until 1983. So I had this wonderful experience the other day with my business school where they say, "Oh, we can't find your transcript." And I said, "What?" I really screamed bloody murder. And and I took it up with the dean of the business school and said, "This is not a very good way to introduce yourself to me," because she's a new dean, I guess, a year ago, and I haven't met her yet. But I've been on the executive advisory council of this business school for how long? A long while, I guess almost 20 years. And oh, I just freaked out. I had a shadow moment where I just, gave them both barrels. But and so I presume that my business school transcript will be forthcoming in due course now.
Well, I can see it now with your sense of humor. The kids are going to be coming home. Mom, Carl Jung taught geometry today.
You bet. You bet.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Jordan, did you notice the portrait that Tim did of me?
You had that kind of look in the play so well, and he hit it and nailed that portrait. It just had that kind of muttering around Carl Jung, talking to himself, look, furrowed brow a bit, and it was just right enough from the profile to really get the mood. Yeah, that was priceless today.
Yeah.
Or yes,
that will be revealed in the future.
So
Tim only showed it.
We all have a lot to learn from young people, though. I mean,
Absolutely, I agree entirely.
Such an opportunity. I'm looking forward to substitute teaching again. That's part of my game plan. And I had a big event today also, which is that I got a closing date for a house, and I'm going to leave living the urban life again. So
yes. Where is the house?
And I came down here to get my teaching license and become a teacher in New York City public schools, but that didn't last very long because I kept getting fired. The house is in New Lebanon, and it's at the base of the mountain, which is Mount Lebanon Shaker community. Also in those Shaker buildings is where Pir Vilayat Khan, a Sufi teacher, made his headquarters. And my daughter went to first through fifth grade on that mountain in the abode buildings. And it's a sacred site of Native Americans. So that's where I am.
And that's the state of New York?
Yeah, in the state of New York. And I'm on the longest road in the United States, which runs from Boston to Sacramento. So that's now
nice.
on my bucket list to drive that road.
Route 20 or?
It's 20. Yes, it's 20. They built 90 to replace it. Can't replace those blue highways.
Yeah, Route 20 is Main Street of my hometown, actually.
Which hometown is that?
Cazenovia, New York.
Cazenovia, right. Yeah, I'm sure it's Main Street of New Lebanon.
It's funny when you said Lebanon.
Yeah.
I said that when I was in Philly. And I said Lebanon, and everyone turns.
Oh,
I
yeah.
said, dude, it's Lebanon.
Lebanon,
It's
Lebanon.
Lebanon,
Well,
Lebanon. And I'm like, no, it's Lebanon. I tell you,
My
it's a country.
daughter-
No, it's Lebanon.
my daughter made
Buddha.
me learn to say Lebanon because she
Yeah.
went to elementary school. I had always said Lebanon.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, but
Yeah.
did you say water? It's like, why do you say water? It's water. No, it's water. It's like WOODA, water. It's like,
Yeah.
anyway, so I thank you for saying Lebanon. It's like, oh, redemption comes in small forms sometimes.
Small doses.
Oh, boy. I can't even begin to tell you the associations I have with a town called Lebanon, which happens to be in Pennsylvania, but I'm going to just leave that one
Right.
But yeah, that's what
unaddressed.
So are you going to
that's fine
bring,
by me. That's fine by me because I don't want to readdress that place.
Yeah. Brian,
are you going to bring an alchemical sensibility to this substitute teaching? I
yeah,
think
we'll
you're
have
gonna
to see. I don't know whether they are going to end up having me substitute in high school, middle school, or elementary school. It's a possibility.
They find the endeavor is
Right.
its own hermetic vessel once in, and that each relationship with these kids
Yeah.
are these little alchemical vessels.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to it. You can be sure that they will have all heard the term Jung before they finish their day with me,
Right.
or
And
their
there will be
week
a
or
lot of
month.
there'll be a lot of prima materia.
Yes, I'm sure it'll be lots of fun to observe. I have two of my oldest grandsons are starting college right now, and I'm trying to just put myself back in that mindset. And so,
But honestly, I have to say the newer generations, you want to talk about giving hope.
Mm.
I had an 18-year-old girl sit down at my table yesterday, and she just opened up with, well, I'm on the Shiro's journey. And, there was immediately, it's like, no, not the heroes, change the, she's just boom. And I would like to look at the fact that I don't need to know everything. So let's just take a road trip. And I was like, wow, this is some life force in front of me. Maybe if we have this generation skip a couple and make the next two spectators or something. But it's
one can hope. The baby boom generation has been controlling the world for an awful long time.
Too long.
the
And
codependence of
and I really hope that somehow the 30-year-olds take over and really skip the two generations that are older than them, because then they're going to make a big impact on the world. And there's no doubt about that in my mind.
I had a group of four kids last week who came. They're all traveling, and they all pulled up chairs. And there's like, it's not that we know everything about each other, but we see through the bullshit. And I mean, it was just like, and at first I thought, wow, arrogance, except they did. And what it was they would compassionately call each other out. Oh, come on. That's not true. You're really more, but there was this directness that was so alive and healthy in them. And so you're right. I mean, 30 and under, and I've got because of course I'm on the plaza, everyone from everywhere is coming through Taos, New Mexico. I mean, Germany, Switzerland, Minnesota, wherever. But I'm seeing almost 100% of these kids in that age, primarily, except the ones still, stuck in snickering, they're still making fun of stuff. There's such an adult, but not with a lost childhood, not like they grew up too fast. There's just they are aware of their life, and it's so wonderful to see.
Yeah. Well, I have noticed changes just in the audience of this YouTube channel over the years, because I used to get gadflies, right? And I took a couple of them on, and they back down, and invariably they think they're hot stuff. And I say, well, you've done that, and here are the things that I've done, how about that? And
the resume can always be made longer.
they run away. Yeah, they run away with their tails in between their legs. But it really hasn't happened recently, and it's partially because anybody that tried to pull junk on the YouTube chat, I simply banned them from the YouTube channel permanently. I said, take your individuation someplace else.
Yeah, well, the gardener has to pull the weeds, and I get it, because I don't reason with them anymore. I mean, anywhere on any platform, it's just block, report, whatever. That it's like they're gone.
Yeah, you're out of here.
You're gonna have a lot of kids sitting in the hall. Out.
Right. So thank you all for being here tonight. I think we'll end early, and with the promise that next week we will be talking about the mana personality.
Okay.
And I'm sort of skipping ahead, but I'll read one part of it, one part of paragraph 395, which we will get to next week, but what we do next week will lead up to it. But here's what Jung said. In their dealings with the visible world, a man must certainly be mad to suppose that they are master of this world. Here we follow quite naturally the principle of non-resistance to all superior forces up to a certain individual limit, beyond which the most peaceful citizen becomes a bloody revolutionary.
Mhm.
Our bowing down before law and order is a commendable example of what our general attitude to the collective unconscious should be. The render under Caesar is in parentheses. Then it says, thus far, our obeisance would not be too difficult, but there are other factors in the world to which our conscience does not give unqualified assent, and yet we bow to them. Why? Because in practice, it is more expedient than the reverse. So, I mean, we've seen this certainly in our politics. And so we will be talking about this mana personality next week. Do cult personalities mean something to everyone? And so it's a very interesting segment of this book, and I've had it deeply underlined for many years. I mean, here's my underlining of only that 2 pages. Whoops, there you go.
Well, and I love that he moving forward into the mana personality, that he uses the word obeisance, because it's the deferential respect rather than the bowing down before. And there's again that we were taught in architectural theory, obeisance of forms, and that basically was the relationship of how two things interact. Mm-hmm. And the deferential respect has somewhat of an empathic or deep listening kind of quality to it, and that's, I think,
so we respect things up to a point, but at some point we can't go beyond that point. And so it's all well and good for our former president to fly his airplane over Iowa, and everybody looks up and says, wow, he's got that big airplane with his name on the side. But, and that creates kind of a mana circumstance. But then, you can only go so far. And I think a lot of us have been wondering, how far would his followers go, and how far would the modern GOP go behind him. And we see that his mana is quite strong, but it's about to be broken, I think. And when it is, then it will be very hard to find a follower of him in the future, I predict. Just as all the Nazis disappeared after World War II. Nobody was a Nazi.
Exactly. And I still I resonate with the joke of, we could change the MAGA hats, leave the letters, but we just outlaw shredded cheese, and they'll have to make America great again.
And I need grating because I use grated cheese all the time. Every other day I make an omelet with a grated cheese, and I'm very appreciative for that, because when we were out in Aptos last November, I volunteered to make my omelet for Colleen and all comers, and Colleen didn't have grated cheese, and therefore I had to use a grater to make cheese from a block of whatever it was,
cheddar or whatever.
Cheddar cheese, yeah, sure, cheddar.
Yeah, I remember when I told that joke, you mentioned Aptos, and so she walks, "Where's the shredded cheese?" And she hands you a big brick. Here you go.
And a grater. I said, "Oh my God, I'm going to bark my fingers." But fortunately, I didn't. Otherwise, there would have been blood in the omelet. But
nice.
Anyway, okay. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Brian, how's everything this week? We didn't catch up with you much.
So there's just an announced partnership with our clinical operation with a national player in the field. So there's just been a lot of, I played corporate, I got a haircut.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, notice you got a haircut.
Yeah. So anyway, it's part of my duties. So I just have been
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't recall. Is it in emergency medicine that you're in?
No, it's I'm the medical director of a rehabilitation hospital. It's nationally known, and it's a small circle of people, but people in the biz recognize it. So
sure.
But it's a whole new way of doing business, which means the medical center didn't want to capitalize a new facility. That's what they did.
Interesting.
And it hurts my feelings, and we're getting exiled, and I have feelings to process.
Yeah. And you had to cut your hair as a result.
Yeah, I felt like it would be better.
Yeah. Well, that's very wise, and you can take the corporate world up to a point. And so
I can see. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that. I mean, right after college, I cut my hair to get the job, and the dean of the grad school is like, "Boy, you guys are doing the wrong things for getting a job. You should have worked on your resume and left the hair." I'm like, "You didn't stop me. I wanted to see how far you'd go, and you went too far." So.
Yeah, and then I just worked on my resume and worked on it, and it got so last week I could finish my application in 1 week's time. So I started a week ago, and today I got offered this job, and nobody ever has spoken to me yet. They have no idea. Well, they might have an idea what I look like, but because I think it was on my resume, but
do they have your fingerprints?
Not yet. I have to go give them.
Oh, I don't know. We'll see.
I have to turn the fingerprints in this week, I think. So
just play the Cheech and Chong game and give them somebody else's fingerprints. Hey, I peeked in this bottle. No, actually, my sister did. She's pregnant. It's really going to mess with the doctors.
Well, yeah, so I will be turning in my fingerprints before September 1st, however.
Right.
So yes, they definitely want to check you out entirely.
Right. But if you're not a felon, you're in.
Yeah.
Right? If you can fog a mirror.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'll be fun. Anyway, okay. See you next week,
Okay.
everybody.